Marcus Thompson had always been invisible. At 24 years old, he spent his days behind a metal desk at Fort Harrison, filing reports and typing up duty rosters. His thick glasses constantly slipped down his nose, and his uniform always seemed too big for his thin frame. The other soldiers barely noticed him as he quietly shuffled papers and answered phones. The morning started like any other. Marcus arrived at the administration building at 6:30 sharp, 30 minutes before his shift officially began. He liked the quiet time before the chaos of the day started. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner as he organized the pile of documents that had accumulated overnight. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez burst through the door at 7:15, his boots thundering across the linoleum floor. Rodriguez was everything Marcus was not, broad-shouldered, confident, and loud. His voice could be heard 3 buildings away when he was training recruits. He had been at Fort Harrison for 8 years and had a reputation for being the toughest drill sergeant on the base. "Thompson," Rodriguez barked, making Marcus jump and nearly spill his coffee. "Where's the morning briefing report?" Marcus quickly pulled the folder from his desk drawer and handed it over. Rodriguez snatched it without a word of thanks and stomped out. This was their usual interaction, brief, one-sided, and dismissive. Marcus had grown used to being treated like furniture by most of the soldiers. The base was buzzing with unusual activity that morning. Word had spread that General Morrison was visiting from the Pentagon. It was rare for such a high-ranking officer to come to Fort Harrison, and everyone was on edge. The regular training schedule had been scrapped, and all personnel were ordered to report to the main parade ground at 10:00 hours. Marcus finished his morning paperwork and made his way to the assembly area. Hundreds of soldiers stood in perfect formation, their uniforms crisp and their boots polished to a mirror shine. He found a spot near the back, trying to blend into the crowd as usual. General Morrison took the podium with an air of authority that commanded immediate attention. He was in his 50s with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons that told stories of conflicts around the world. When he spoke, his voice carried across the field without needing amplification. "Soldiers," the general began, "I'm here today because our military faces new challenges. Modern warfare requires not just strength and courage, but adaptability and quick thinking. Traditional training methods, while important, may not be enough to prepare our forces for what lies ahead." Marcus listened intently, wondering where this was leading. He had always been fascinated by military strategy, though he had never imagined himself as anything more than a paper pusher. "Today, I want to demonstrate something," General Morrison continued. "I'm looking for a volunteer from this assembly. Someone willing to participate in a demonstration that will challenge our assumptions about combat readiness and effectiveness." A murmur rippled through the ranks. Dozens of hands shot up immediately, the strongest, most confident soldiers eager to impress the visiting general. Rodriguez stepped forward without being asked, his chest puffed out with pride. "I volunteer, sir," Rodriguez shouted, his voice echoing across the field. "Sergeant First Class Rodriguez at your service." The general nodded approvingly. "Excellent, Sergeant Rodriguez. I've heard about your reputation as one of our finest drill instructors." He paused, scanning the crowd. "But I need one more volunteer. Someone unexpected." Marcus felt something strange stirring inside him. For years he had watched from the sidelines, observing, learning, but never participating. He had studied every training manual, watched countless demonstrations, and quietly absorbed knowledge that others dismissed as academic. Something about the general's words resonated with him. Before he could second-guess himself, Marcus found his hand slowly rising above his head. The movement felt foreign, like watching someone else's arm move. Soldiers around him turned to stare, confusion evident on their faces. Who was this scrawny clerk? And why was he volunteering for anything involving a drill sergeant? General Morrison's eyes found Marcus in the crowd, and a slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "You there in the back. Step forward, soldier." Marcus's legs felt like jelly as he walked through the parted crowd. Every eye was on him, and he could hear whispered comments and barely suppressed laughter. Rodriguez looked at him with a mixture of confusion and contempt, clearly wondering why this nobody was being chosen for whatever demonstration the general had planned. "State your name and position." "Soldier," the general commanded. "Private Marcus Thompson, sir. Administrative Clerk, Personnel Division." His voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried in the sudden silence. The general studied him for a long moment as if seeing something others missed. "Very good, Private Thompson. Today, you and Sergeant Rodriguez are going to help me show these soldiers something important about assumptions and hidden potential." Marcus glanced at Rodriguez, who was now looking at him like he was some kind of joke. The sergeant's massive frame towered over Marcus's slight build, and the contrast was almost comical. Whatever was about to happen, Marcus was certain he was about to embarrass himself in front of the entire base. But deep inside, in a place he had kept carefully hidden for years, something was awakening. Marcus Thompson was about to discover that being invisible had given him the greatest advantage of all. No one expected anything from him, which meant no one was prepared for what he was truly capable of. General Morrison gestured for both men to follow him to a cleared area in the center of the parade ground. Marcus's heart pounded so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. His palms were sweating and his glasses kept sliding down his nose. He pushed them up nervously, trying to appear more confident than he felt. "Gentlemen," the general announced to the assembled crowd, "what you're about to witness is a demonstration of why we must never judge capability by appearance alone." He turned to face Rodriguez and Marcus. "Sergeant Rodriguez, you have an exemplary record. 8 years of service, countless successful training programs, and a reputation for toughness that extends throughout this entire base." Rodriguez straightened his shoulders and smiled proudly. This was clearly going exactly as he had expected. The crowd murmured their agreement. Everyone knew Rodriguez was one of the best. "Private Thompson," the general continued, "you've been working in administration for 3 years. Your file shows perfect attendance, meticulous record-keeping, and absolutely no disciplinary issues." He paused. "It also shows something else that might interest you all." Marcus felt his face burning red. He had no idea what the general was referring to, and the suspense was killing him. The crowd leaned forward, curious about what revelation was coming. Before enlisting, Private Thompson held a black belt in 3 different martial arts disciplines. He was also a regional champion in competitive fighting. The general's voice carried clearly across the field. However, he specifically requested assignment to administrative duties when he enlisted. The crowd's murmur turned to surprised chatter. Rodriguez's confident expression faltered slightly as he looked at Marcus with new eyes. Marcus himself was shocked that the general had dug so deeply into his background. He had deliberately downplayed his fighting experience during enlistment, wanting to leave that part of his life behind. "I requested administrative duties because I wanted to serve my country without violence, sir," Marcus said quietly. "I had enough of fighting in my civilian life." "And that's exactly why you're perfect for this demonstration," the general replied. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I want you to approach Private Thompson as if he were an uncooperative recruit who refuses to follow orders. Use your standard intimidation techniques, the ones that usually work so effectively." Rodriguez grinned widely. This was his specialty. He had broken down countless cocky recruits who thought they were tough. A skinny clerk would be no challenge at all. He stepped closer to Marcus, using his superior height and bulk to loom over him. "Listen here, you pathetic excuse for a soldier," Rodriguez growled, his face inches from Marcus's. "You think you can just stand there and ignore orders? I'll show you what happens to smart-mouth recruits who don't know their place." Marcus remained perfectly still, his breathing steady and controlled. Years of meditation and discipline training had taught him to stay calm under pressure. He could feel Rodriguez's breath on his face, smell the coffee and aftershave. But his heart rate remained stable. Rodriguez grabbed Marcus by the front of his uniform, lifting him slightly off the ground. "When I'm talking to you, maggot, you better listen. I've broken better men than you before breakfast." The crowd watched in uncomfortable silence. This was typical Rodriguez behavior during training, but something felt different with Marcus as the target. The small clerk showed no signs of fear or intimidation. His eyes remained focused and alert behind his glasses. "Drop and give me 50 push-ups right now," Rodriguez shouted, releasing Marcus's uniform and pointing at the ground. "Maybe some physical exercise will teach you respect." Marcus looked calmly at Rodriguez, then at the general, who nodded slightly. "I respectfully decline, Sergeant," Marcus said in a quiet but clear voice. Rodriguez's face turned red with anger. In 8 years of service, no recruit had ever simply refused his orders. The crowd gasped at Marcus's boldness. Some soldiers shook their heads, expecting to see the clerk completely destroyed by Rodriguez's inevitable response. "You refuse?" Rodriguez screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "Nobody refuses my orders." I'm going to make you wish you'd never been born." Rodriguez moved forward aggressively, intending to physically force Marcus to comply. In his mind, this would be over in seconds. The scrawny clerk would be on the ground, humiliated and broken, serving as an example to everyone else about the consequences of defiance. But as Rodriguez lunged forward, something extraordinary happened. Marcus's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The nervous, awkward clerk vanished, replaced by someone completely different. His stance shifted, his breathing pattern changed, and his eyes took on a focus that was almost predatory. Years of suppressed training and instinct flooded back into Marcus's muscle memory. The countless hours spent perfecting techniques, the discipline of martial arts practice, the strategic thinking that had made him a champion, all of it returned in a rush of controlled power. Rodriguez reached out to grab Marcus again, confident in his superior size and strength. He had done this hundreds of times before with recruits who needed to be taught their place. But this time, his target was ready. The crowd held its breath as the two men faced each other, the massive, intimidating drill sergeant and the quiet clerk who had just refused to back down. General Morrison watched with keen interest, knowing that what was about to unfold would challenge everything. These soldiers thought they knew about strength, power, and capability. Marcus adjusted his glasses one final time and assumed a fighting stance that no one on the base had ever seen before. Rodriguez charged forward like a bull, his massive frame moving with surprising speed for someone his size. He had used his physical presence to intimidate countless recruits, and he expected this confrontation to end exactly like all the others, with his opponent on the ground, thoroughly humiliated. But Marcus was no longer the timid clerk who had raised his hand minutes earlier. As Rodriguez approached, Marcus's body moved with fluid precision that seemed to defy physics. He sidestepped the sergeant's charge with minimal effort, causing Rodriguez to stumble past him and nearly lose his balance. The crowd gasped. Rodriguez quickly recovered and spun around, his face now red with embarrassment as well as anger. He had never missed such an easy target before. The soldiers watching could hardly believe what they had just seen. The small clerk had made their fearsome drill sergeant look clumsy. "Stand still and fight like a man." Rodriguez roared, swinging a heavy fist toward Marcus's head. Marcus ducked under the punch smoothly, the movement so natural it looked effortless. As Rodriguez's arm passed over him, Marcus rose and delivered a precise strike to a pressure point on the sergeant's wrist. Rodriguez's hand immediately went numb and he pulled it back in shock and pain. "What the hell?" Rodriguez muttered, shaking his hand to restore feeling. He had never encountered anything like this before. The little clerk was moving like water, impossible to grab or hit. General Morrison watched with growing satisfaction. This was exactly what he had hoped to demonstrate. The assembled soldiers were completely silent now, their attention focused entirely on the impossible scene unfolding before them. Rodriguez tried a different approach, attempting to grab Marcus in a bear hug that would use his superior size and strength. He wrapped his massive arms around Marcus from behind, lifting him off the ground. For a moment, it seemed like the demonstration might be over. "Got you now, you little weasel," Rodriguez grunted, squeezing tighter. But Marcus remained calm even in Rodriguez's powerful grip. He relaxed his body completely, making himself heavier and harder to hold. Then, using a technique he had learned years ago, he shifted his weight and dropped his center of gravity, simultaneously striking Rodriguez's foot with his heel. Rodriguez's grip loosened just enough for Marcus to slip free. As he escaped, Marcus grabbed Rodriguez's arm and used the sergeant's own momentum against him, executing a perfect hip throw that sent the much larger man tumbling to the ground. The impact echoed across the parade ground as Rodriguez hit the dirt hard. For a moment he lay there stunned, unable to process what had just happened. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs and gasps. Their invincible drill sergeant was on his back, defeated by someone they had barely noticed before today. Rodriguez rolled over and got to his feet, dirt covering his uniform and his pride severely wounded. His face was a mixture of rage, confusion, and something he had never felt before in a fight. Genuine concern about his ability to win. "You got lucky," he growled, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "That won't happen again." Marcus stood calmly a few feet away, barely breathing hard despite the intense physical exchange. His glasses had somehow stayed in place throughout the entire encounter, and his uniform was still neat and clean. He looked exactly like the mild-mannered clerk he had been minutes before, except for his eyes, which now held a quiet confidence that no one had ever seen. "I don't want to hurt you, Sergeant," Marcus said respectfully. "This demonstration has gone far enough." Rodriguez's pride wouldn't let him back down, especially not in front of hundreds of soldiers who had looked up to him as the toughest man on the base. He charged again, this time trying to tackle Marcus around the waist like a football player. Marcus waited until the last possible second, then stepped aside and placed his hand on Rodriguez's back as he passed. With perfect timing and minimal force, Marcus redirected Rodriguez's momentum, sending him crashing into a nearby equipment table. The sound of the impact was sickening. Rodriguez hit the table hard and bounced off, landing in a heap among scattered training equipment. This time he stayed down longer, clearly dazed and struggling to understand how a clerk half his size was dominating him so completely. General Morrison stepped forward, his expression grave but satisfied. "I think that's enough demonstration for now," he announced to the crowd. "Sergeant Rodriguez, are you injured?" Rodriguez slowly got to his feet, swaying slightly. His uniform was torn and dirty, his ego completely shattered. He had been defeated not once, not twice, but 3 times in a row by someone he had dismissed as completely harmless. "I'm fine, sir," Rodriguez mumbled, though it was clear he was anything but fine. His world had been turned upside down in the span of 5 minutes. Marcus extended his hand to help Rodriguez steady himself, his expression showing genuine concern rather than triumph. "Are you sure you're okay, Sergeant? That last fall looked pretty hard." Rodriguez stared at the offered hand, seeing Marcus clearly for the first time. The quiet respect in the clerk's voice, the lack of gloating or mockery, the genuine concern for his welfare. It was completely different from what Rodriguez had expected, from someone who had just defeated him so thoroughly. Tear. Crowd watched in absolute silence, as their understanding of strength, power, and capability was completely rewritten before their eyes. Rodriguez looked at Marcus's outstretched hand for a long moment, his pride warring with reality. Finally, he reached out and accepted the help, allowing Marcus to steady him as he regained his balance. The gesture sent ripples of amazement through the watching soldiers, the defeated drill sergeant accepting assistance from the man who had just humiliated him. "Thank you," Rodriguez said quietly, his voice barely audible. It was perhaps the first time in his military career that he had thanked someone for help after a fight. General Morrison stepped between the two men, his expression serious, but pleased. "Soldiers," he addressed the crowd, "what you have just witnessed is precisely why our military must evolve. We have spent decades focusing on traditional measures of strength and aggression, but modern warfare requires different skills." The assembled troops listened in stunned silence. Everything they thought they knew about military effectiveness had been challenged in the past 10 minutes. Their strongest, most intimidating drill sergeant had been easily defeated by someone they had never taken seriously. "Private Thompson," the general continued, "would you mind explaining to your fellow soldiers why you chose administrative work instead of combat training when you enlisted?" Marcus removed his glasses and cleaned them nervously, the confident fighter from moments before once again becoming the shy clerk. "Sir, I spent years competing in martial arts tournaments before I enlisted. I won fights, earned trophies, and gained recognition, but I also saw too much unnecessary violence and aggression." He paused, looking around at the hundreds of faces staring at him. "When I joined the army, I wanted to serve my country in a way that didn't involve hurting people. I thought I could contribute more effectively by keeping records, managing logistics, and supporting operations from behind the scenes." Rodriguez, still recovering from his defeat, listened with growing understanding. "You mean you've been holding back this whole time? You could have been in special forces or combat units, but you chose to file papers instead." "Yes, Sergeant," Marcus replied. "I believe that true strength meant knowing when not to use your abilities, not proving how tough you are all the time." General Morrison nodded approvingly. "And that philosophy is exactly why Private Thompson represents the future of our military. In modern conflicts, the most valuable soldiers are often those who can think strategically, remain calm under pressure, and use minimal force to achieve maximum results." The general turned to address the entire assembly. "How many of you noticed Private Thompson during his 3 years at this base?" How many of you took the time to learn about his background or capabilities? A few soldiers raised their hands sheepishly, but most remained silent. Marcus had been virtually invisible to them. Just another face in the administrative building. This is our problem, the general continued. We make assumptions based on appearance, rank, and traditional military bearing. We overlook valuable assets because they don't fit our preconceived notions of what a soldier should look like. Rodriguez, his ego bruised but his respect for Marcus growing, stepped forward. Sir, permission to speak? Granted, Sergeant. I've been a drill instructor for 8 years, and I've always believed that physical intimidation and aggressive posturing were the keys to effective training. But watching Private Thompson today, Rodriguez paused, struggling with his words. He defeated me without anger, without cruelty, and without trying to humiliate me. He fought with precision and control that I've never seen before. Marcus looked surprised by Rodriguez's honesty. He had expected continued resentment, not this thoughtful analysis. Furthermore, Rodriguez continued, when the fight was over, his first concern was for my welfare, not for celebrating his victory. That shows a kind of strength that I'm not sure I've ever possessed. The crowd murmured their agreement. Many of them had been on the receiving end of Rodriguez's traditional intimidation tactics, and they recognized the difference in Marcus's approach. General Morrison smiled for the first time since arriving at the base. Sergeant Rodriguez, that observation shows exactly the kind of growth mindset our military needs. The ability to learn from unexpected situations and adapt our thinking based on new evidence. He turned back to the assembly. Modern warfare isn't won by the loudest, most aggressive soldiers. It's won by those who can think clearly under pressure, who can adapt to unexpected situations, and who understand that true power often comes from restraint rather than force. Marcus shifted uncomfortably under the attention, still not entirely comfortable being the center of focus. Sir, I hope this demonstration doesn't give anyone the wrong impression. Sergeant Rodriguez is an excellent soldier and instructor. The outcome today doesn't change his value to this base or his effectiveness as a leader. This generous statement earned Marcus nods of approval from throughout the crowd. Even in victory, he was showing the kind of character that made others want to follow him. Rodriguez looked at Marcus with newfound respect. Private Thompson, I owe you an apology. I've spent 3 years treating you like you were invisible, dismissing you as just another desk clerk. I never took the time to learn who you really were or what you might be capable of. No apology necessary, Sergeant, Marcus replied. You treated me exactly how I wanted to be treated. I preferred being invisible because it allowed me to observe and learn without the pressure of expectations. General Morrison watched this exchange with satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of mutual respect and learning that the military needed more of. Traditional hierarchies based solely on rank and intimidation were being replaced by recognition of diverse skills and approaches. General Morrison raised his hand to quiet the murmuring crowd. What we've witnessed today represents a fundamental shift in how we must think about military effectiveness. Private Thompson, would you be willing to demonstrate some of your techniques to your fellow soldiers? Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the continued attention. Sir, I'm not sure that's appropriate. I didn't defeat Sergeant Rodriguez to show off or to prove superiority. The circumstances were unique, and I acted only because it was part of your demonstration. And that humility is exactly why you're the right person to teach, the general replied firmly. Sergeant Rodriguez, how would you feel about learning some of these techniques from Private Thompson? Rodriguez, still processing his defeat, considered the question carefully. His entire identity had been built around being the toughest, most intimidating soldier on the base. The idea of learning from someone he had dismissed as a weakling went against everything he had believed about military hierarchy. But the evidence was undeniable. Marcus had defeated him decisively, and more importantly had done so with a level of control and precision that Rodriguez had never encountered. If he wanted to continue being effective as a drill instructor, he needed to understand these new approaches. Yes, sir, Rodriguez said finally. I would be honored to learn from Private Thompson if he's willing to teach me. Marcus looked genuinely surprised by this response. He had expected resentment and hostility, not a willingness to learn. Sergeant, are you sure? I don't want to undermine your authority with the recruits or change your successful training methods. My methods weren't so successful against you, Rodriguez admitted with a rueful smile. Maybe it's time I expanded my toolkit. General Morrison nodded approvingly. Excellent. Private Thompson, I'm authorizing you to spend 2 hours each afternoon training interested personnel in defensive techniques and conflict de-escalation. This will be in addition to your regular administrative duties. The crowd began to disperse, but many soldiers lingered, clearly wanting to learn more about the quiet clerk who had just defeated their most feared drill sergeant. Marcus found himself surrounded by curious faces and respectful questions. How long have you been training in martial arts? Asked Private Johnson, a young recruit who had arrived at the base just weeks earlier. Since I was 12, Marcus replied. My father wanted me to learn discipline and self-control. He said that knowing how to fight would teach me when not to fight. Could you show us some basic moves? Asked Corporal Martinez, a woman who had struggled with the physical requirements of basic training. Marcus looked around nervously at the growing crowd. I suppose I could demonstrate a few simple techniques. But remember, these are tools for defense and de-escalation, not for aggression or bullying. For the next hour, Marcus found himself teaching impromptu lessons to groups of fascinated soldiers. He showed them basic stance and balance, explained the principles of using an opponent's momentum against them, and demonstrated pressure points that could temporarily disable without causing permanent harm. Rodriguez watched from a distance, still processing the day's events. Captain Williams, the base commander, approached him with a concerned expression. How are you holding up, Sergeant? Captain Williams asked. That was quite a public demonstration. Honestly, sir, it was exactly what I needed, Rodriguez replied. I've been getting complacent, relying too much on intimidation and not enough on actual skill. Private Thompson just taught me more about real fighting in 10 minutes than I've learned in years. Captain Williams looked surprised by this response. He had expected Rodriguez to be humiliated and resentful, possibly requiring counseling or reassignment. Instead, the drill sergeant seemed energized and eager to learn. You're not concerned about your reputation with the recruits? The captain asked. My reputation was built on fear and aggression, Rodriguez said. If losing to someone like Private Thompson damages that reputation, then maybe it needed to be damaged. I'd rather be respected for what I know than feared for what I might do. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his impromptu teaching session, demonstrating how proper breathing and mental focus could dramatically improve reaction time and decision-making under stress. His shy demeanor had given way to quiet confidence as he shared knowledge he had kept hidden for years. The most important thing to remember, Marcus told his growing audience, is that these techniques are about control. Control of yourself, control of the situation, and control of your opponent's options. Violence should always be the last resort, not the first response. Sergeant Rodriguez finally approached the group, his pride swallowed and his curiosity overcoming his embarrassment. Private Thompson, could you show me that wrist technique you used? I've never seen anything like it. Marcus looked up at the much larger man who had been his adversary just hours earlier. Of course, Sergeant. But I'll need you to attack me again so I can demonstrate properly. Rodriguez hesitated. The idea of attacking Marcus again, knowing the likely outcome, was difficult to accept. But his desire to learn overcame his pride. All right, Rodriguez said, extending his arm toward Marcus. But go slowly so I can understand what's happening. Marcus gently guided Rodriguez through the technique, explaining the anatomy and pressure points involved. As Rodriguez felt the precise application of force that had disabled his hand earlier, his respect for Marcus's knowledge grew even deeper. This isn't just fighting, Rodriguez realized. This is science applied to combat. Exactly, Marcus agreed. Every movement has a purpose. Every technique is based on physics and anatomy rather than brute force. That's why size and strength matter less than knowledge and timing. As the afternoon wore on, word spread throughout the base about the morning's demonstration and the ongoing training session. Soldiers from every unit began arriving to watch and learn, creating an unprecedented gathering of personnel eager to absorb new knowledge from the most unlikely teacher on the base. Over the following weeks, Fort Harrison underwent a quiet revolution. Marcus's afternoon training sessions grew from a small group of curious soldiers to organized classes with waiting lists. His approach to teaching was as methodical and patient as his administrative work had always been. But now his colleagues saw it as strength rather than weakness. Rodriguez became Marcus's most dedicated student and eventual co-instructor. The transformation in the drill sergeant was remarkable to witness. Where he had once relied on shouting and intimidation, He now incorporated principles of respect and strategic thinking into his training methods. The recruits responded positively to this change, showing improved performance and higher morale. I never realized how much energy I was wasting on anger, Rodriguez confided to Marcus during one of their training sessions. Your approach achieves better results with less stress on everyone involved. Marcus, still adjusting to his new role as a teacher, appreciated Rodriguez's support. You are never wrong to demand excellence, Sergeant. You just found a more efficient way to achieve it. The partnership between the two men became legendary on the base. Soldiers would come to watch Rodriguez and Marcus spar together, amazed at how the former adversaries had become collaborators. Their practice sessions were more like academic discussions, with each move followed by detailed analysis and explanation. General Morrison returned to Fort Harrison a month later to observe the changes his demonstration had sparked. He found a base transformed, where traditional hierarchies had been supplemented by mutual respect and shared learning. The morning briefing that had once been a one-way communication from officers to enlisted personnel had become a collaborative discussion where insights could come from anyone. Private Thompson, the general said during his visit, I have a proposition for you. Marcus looked up from the training manual he was writing, his glasses reflecting the afternoon sunlight. He had been documenting the techniques he taught, creating a comprehensive guide that could be used at other bases. I'm listening, sir, Marcus replied respectfully. I want you to consider officer candidate school. Your demonstration here has convinced me that the military needs leaders who understand both traditional and unconventional approaches to conflict resolution. Marcus set down his pen and considered the offer carefully. Becoming an officer would mean leaving behind the comfortable invisibility he had cultivated for years. It would mean accepting responsibility for leading others and making decisions that could affect lives. Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm leadership material. I've always preferred working behind the scenes, supporting others rather than directing them. General Morrison smiled. That's exactly why you would make an excellent leader. True leadership isn't about demanding obedience through fear or intimidation. It's about inspiring others to achieve their best while remaining humble enough to continue learning yourself. Rodriguez, who had been listening to the conversation, stepped forward. Private Thompson, if I may speak freely. Of course, Sergeant. Before you came along, I thought leadership meant being the toughest person in the room. You taught me that real leadership means making everyone else better. If you become an officer, you could spread that philosophy throughout the entire military. Marcus looked around at the soldiers who had gathered for the afternoon training session. These men and women had become more confident, more capable, and more respectful of each other through the techniques he had shared. Perhaps Rodriguez was right about the potential impact of expanding this approach. Could I continue teaching these classes if I accepted officer training? Marcus asked. Not only could you continue, the general replied, but you would have the authority to implement these training methods as official military doctrine. Imagine if every base had instructors who combined traditional military discipline with your approach to conflict resolution. The idea was compelling. Marcus had always believed that his martial arts training was most valuable when it prevented violence rather than caused it. The opportunity to influence military culture on a broader scale appealed to his desire to serve effectively. I'll need time to consider this, sir, Marcus said finally. Of course, take all the time you need. That evening, Marcus walked around the base observing the changes that had occurred since the general's first visit. Soldiers greeted him with genuine respect rather than polite indifference. Training sessions were more focused and less stressful. The overall atmosphere was more collaborative and less competitive. He stopped by the administration building where he had worked in anonymity for 3 years. His replacement, a young private named Collins, was struggling with the complex filing system Marcus had developed. Need some help? Marcus offered, settling into his old chair. Yes, sir, Collins replied gratefully. Yes, Private Thompson. Sorry, everyone's been saying you might become an officer soon. Marcus smiled at the slip. The idea of being called sir by other soldiers still felt strange, but he was beginning to understand that leadership wasn't about the title or the authority. It was about the willingness to help others succeed. As he worked alongside Collins, organizing reports and updating personnel files, Marcus realized that his administrative work had been leadership all along. Every accurately filed report had helped commanders make better decisions. Every efficiently organized system had made other soldiers' jobs easier. Every problem he had quietly solved had contributed to the base's overall effectiveness. The next morning, Marcus knocked on General Morrison's office door. He had made his decision, and he was ready to accept the challenges and responsibilities that came with it. "Sir, I would like to accept your offer for officer candidate school. With one condition." "What's that, Private Thompson?" "I want to continue working with Sergeant Rodriguez to develop a comprehensive training program that can be implemented across all branches of the military. This approach shouldn't be limited to one base or one unit." General Morrison's smile was immediate and genuine. "I was hoping you would say that. Welcome to the future of military leadership, soon to be Lieutenant Thompson." 2 years later, Lieutenant Marcus Thompson stood before a classroom of senior military instructors from bases across the country. His uniform now bore the insignia of his rank, but his demeanor remained the same quiet confidence that had impressed General Morrison years earlier. Behind him, a presentation screen displayed the title, Integrated Combat Philosophy, Strength Through Strategic Restraint. "Gentlemen and ladies," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of experience rather than volume. "When I was a clerk at Fort Harrison, I believed my greatest contribution would be keeping accurate records and staying invisible. Today, I want to share how that experience taught me the most valuable lesson about leadership and combat effectiveness." In the front row, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez sat with a notebook, ready to assist with the demonstration portion of the training. He had been promoted twice since their first encounter, and now served as Marcus's primary instructor for the new military curriculum they had developed together. "The program we're implementing nationwide isn't about replacing traditional military training," Marcus continued. "It's about enhancing it with principles that modern warfare demands: strategic thinking, adaptability, and the wisdom to know when force is necessary and when it's counterproductive." A colonel from Fort Bragg raised his hand. "Lieutenant Thompson, how do we maintain military discipline and respect for authority while implementing these more collaborative approaches?" Marcus nodded, having anticipated this question from many traditional military leaders. "Colonel, discipline and respect are actually strengthened when they're based on competence and mutual understanding, rather than fear and intimidation." "Sergeant Rodriguez, would you mind sharing your perspective on this?" Rodriguez stood and addressed the group. 2 years ago, I thought respect meant fear. My recruits followed orders because they were afraid of consequences, not because they understood the purpose or believed in the mission. Since implementing Lieutenant Thompson's methods, my training completion rates have improved by 30%, and recruit satisfaction scores have increased dramatically. More importantly, Rodriguez continued, the soldiers I train now are better decision-makers in high-pressure situations because they've learned to think strategically rather than just react aggressively. They're more effective in the field because they understand the principles behind their training. Marcus smiled at his former adversary's explanation. Their partnership had become one of the most successful innovations in military training, combining Rodriguez's experience with traditional methods and Marcus's understanding of strategic restraint. "Let me demonstrate what we mean by strategic restraint," Marcus said, moving to the center of the room. "Sergeant Rodriguez, would you mind playing the role of an uncooperative civilian in a peacekeeping scenario?" Rodriguez stood and assumed an aggressive posture, channeling his old intimidation tactics. "I don't care what uniform you're wearing. You have no right to be in my neighborhood." Instead of matching Rodriguez's aggression, Marcus remained calm and maintained respectful body language. "Sir, I understand your frustration. We're here to ensure everyone's safety, including yours. What specific concerns do you have that we might be able to address?" The simple change in approach, acknowledging Rodriguez's emotions and asking for specific information rather than demanding compliance, visibly reduced the tension in the role-play scenario. "This is the difference our training makes," Marcus explained to the audience. Traditional military response might have escalated this situation into confrontation. Strategic restraint achieves cooperation while maintaining authority. A Marine Corps instructor spoke up. "This approach seems effective for peacekeeping, but what about actual combat situations?" Marcus exchanged a look with Rodriguez, who nodded and moved into an attack position. "The same principles apply to physical confrontation," Marcus said. "Sergeant Rodriguez, please attack as if you intend to cause serious harm." Rodriguez launched into a series of aggressive moves that would have overwhelmed most opponents. But Marcus responded with the same fluid precision he had displayed years earlier, neutralizing each attack with minimal force while maintaining complete control of the situation. The demonstration lasted less than 30 seconds, ending with Rodriguez safely restrained but unharmed. The audience watched in impressed silence as Marcus helped Rodriguez to his feet with the same respectful assistance he had offered during their first encounter. Combat effectiveness isn't diminished by strategic restraint, Marcus explained. If anything, it's enhanced because soldiers learn to think clearly under pressure and use exactly the amount of force necessary to achieve their objectives. After the formal presentation, several instructors approached Marcus with questions about implementing the program at their bases. Word had spread throughout the military about the dramatic improvements at Fort Harrison and the dozen other bases where the integrated training had been tested. "Lieutenant?" asked a Navy SEAL instructor. "How do we convince old school leaders that these methods aren't making soldiers soft?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Show them the results. Our graduates score higher on tactical assessments, show better judgment in complex scenarios, and maintain higher morale during extended deployments. The proof is in the performance, not in the philosophy." As the day's training concluded, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey from invisible clerk to military innovator. The skills that had made him effective at filing reports and organizing systems, attention to detail, strategic thinking, and the ability to see the bigger picture had proven equally valuable in developing new approaches to military training. Rodriguez joined him as they packed up the training materials. "Hard to believe it all started with you raising your hand when the general asked for volunteers." "I almost didn't," Marcus admitted. "For a moment I thought about staying invisible and letting someone else take the spotlight." "What changed your mind?" Marcus adjusted his glasses, a gesture that had become his trademark among the soldiers he trained. "I realized that true service sometimes means stepping forward when you'd rather stay hidden. The skills I'd been keeping to myself could help others become better soldiers and better people." 3 months later, the Integrated Combat Philosophy Program was officially adopted as standard training across all branches of the U.S. military. Marcus Thompson, the former invisible clerk, had become one of the most influential military educators of his generation. But perhaps most importantly, he had proven that genuine strength often comes from the most unexpected places, and that the quiet person in the corner might just be the one with the most valuable insights to share. His story became required reading at military academies, not as an example of fighting prowess, but as a lesson about the power of strategic thinking, humble leadership, and the courage to volunteer when duty calls. The general's demonstration that day had revealed more than just hidden combat skills. It had uncovered the truth that real military effectiveness comes from wisdom, restraint, and the willingness to learn from anyone, regardless of their rank or appearance.